The vast majority of teams fail not because of bad intention, but because they do not know how to work well together. Most people will want to do the best, to have the best outcome for the team. They will want their team to win, otherwise they wouldn't be part of that team. However, because they fail to work together, they ultimately fail as a unit, as a team. And that is what we are going to address today. So these important principles will be one after the other. One cannot work without the other. And these will make sure that if implemented, your team will succeed, or at least will have the highest chances of success. My name is Robert Indries. I own 8 companies generating 7 figures yearly. And I took the last 14 years perfecting team management, team dynamics, and team effectiveness. And so today we're going to talk about all of the conclusions of all of that experience across these 14 years. So let's start with the most important one, at least in my view. What is the question that everyone asks? It's that, how do we eliminate issues within teams? How do we eliminate, let's say, even 50 to 90% of issues that arise whilst working with others? Well, so far, I've hired over 200 professionals, hired and managed. And what I can tell you is that every single person has a different way of being. And I use the word being very carefully. It's not just of working. They literally are different in many, many ways. And so what can we do because we're all different? How can we make sure that even though we're different, we succeed despite our differences and thrive because of them? Well, that's the number one principle we're going to discuss today. And that is to set expectations with every single individual on the team. You should set expectations in terms of time. For example, when do people work? How much time will they dedicate? You should set expectations in terms of the type of work they're expected to do or how often. You can also set expectations in terms of how people communicate with one another, what words they can't use, what words they can use. For example, in all of our companies, cussing, cursing, bad vibes, or things of that nature are literally forbidden. If we hire someone by mistake that acts perfectly, let's say, acceptable during the interview and during the test phase, but then a few months in, they start swearing in general or at other people, we immediately tackle that and say, hey, wait, this is not allowed in our business. And that is just how we operate. If you operate differently, that's perfectly fine. However, the rule and the expectations are set all the time. Next, if you've ever worked in a team, I'm 100% sure you know this next story. It's about that moment when everyone agrees that some specific thing has to be done, right? Everyone agrees that that needs to be done. Maybe a group of people or everyone on the team says, okay, let's do this. We set a deadline. We agree on what needs to be done and how to perform it and so on and so forth. And then everyone's clear, everyone's happy. The week passes or whatever, time passes. And then when you get to check up on, okay, has that been done? What's the progress on it? Guess what? Everyone just looks at one another and says, oh, I thought you were doing that. Oh, I thought you were doing that. Well, I was waiting on you to send me whatever. This is not how effective teams work. And so what's the solution for that? The solution is to always only have one responsible, not more, one. If for anything in even a group dynamic, let's say a group initiative, if you have a group initiative, the initiative itself has to be distributed into enough tasks so that every task has only one person that does that specific thing and nothing else. Once they have very clearly, hey, this is your responsibility 100% and you need to deliver this by this time, there is no more, oh, I was waiting on someone else to do that. No. You had to do this. You were 100% responsible for delivering that. As a little bit of a caveat on this point too, something that we tend to do within all of our companies is we do not delegate tasks at all. We only delegate outcomes. We delegate what is expected as an end result. And so we don't have time to go into the difference between tasks and outcomes today. However, we go very deeply into this subject in our book Unshackled, the 7 levels of business excellence, where we say exactly why high performance teams always work on outcomes, not on tasks. For the next principle, I'd like to ask you, how often did it happen for you in a team dynamic that something, a task or an important project, got delayed by 1 day, 2 days, things were literally just going off track? I can tell you that for us, this has happened for years and years and years at the beginning of our companies. What we realized is that there's a very simple hack that we could implement that we literally made the principle in all of our companies, which is to never set deadlines as dates or days. So in our companies, a deadline for an outcome isn't Monday. Get it to me by Monday. No, it's Monday by 12 p.m. noon. So guess what? At 12:01, if that deliverable is not in my inbox or in my Slack or wherever I need to get it, you're already late. So by default, the moment a time-based deadline is passed, you can immediately follow up on it. You can say, hey David, I didn't get what you said you're going to send me by 12. Where is it? Right? And so by default, they're going to say, oh, I'm working on it. Okay, how many more minutes do you need? Because this is already overdue. So the quality of that conversation changes significantly, because now we're not measuring timelines in days, we're measuring timelines in hours or minutes. And that helps move things forward like there's no tomorrow. Another little caveat here that I would like to say is that people tend to use terms like end of the day or end of the week. I'll finish this by end of workday Monday. Do not have tasks with a due date at the end of a workday. Because guess what happens? If they don't finish by the end of the workday, they're just going to take off. And now by default is going to be delayed until the next day. If the expectation is set, remember principle number 1, that you do not end your workday until that task is actually completed, then that's fine. We have the expectation set. If that expectation does not exist, if someone's workday ends at 5 p.m., make sure that the final deadline they have is until, let's say, 3 p.m. So if they, for some reason, don't finish by 3, you can follow up with them at 3:05, say, hey, this is still due today, please, I need this today. And that helps move things so much quicker. The next principle we're going to talk about has a lot to do with this one around setting deadlines. However, as context, let me ask you, how many times did it happen for you that your team or you were late on a deadline? Let me also ask you, how many times it happened that when someone was late on a deadline, it just pushed the entire project. It just made everything later. So I know this used to happen in our companies much more than I would have liked it to occur. And so we were thinking, how can we make this happen way less frequently? And so no one on the team wanted to be late. No one on the team wanted to wait on others or for them to be the reason why everything is late and so on and so forth. So everyone wanted everyone else to succeed and everyone wanted the team to succeed. So what did we do in order to avoid this from happening? Well, that's principle number 4, which is to set checkpoints. In general, people, when they delegate a task or an outcome or a project, they delegate that, they agree on what needs to be done, and then they agree on a final due date. Instead of only agreeing on a final due date, agree also on at least one or if not more checkpoints. And then you, as the team member or as a leadership group, you figure out what are those checkpoints. If we need to deliver an article, for example, a very simple task to do, what are some of the checkpoints? Well, number 1 checkpoint is that we should have a very clear SEO brief on the article. So that's checkpoint 1, that has one responsible. Then number 2, we need someone to write a first draft. So writing the draft is another checkpoint. Then number 3, we need someone to review that draft, and that's the third checkpoint. And then the final deadline by which the article needs to be published on your website or on a client's website, that's already the final checkpoint. So, or the deadline basically. So basically, until that deadline, we've made significant progress on the journey. So you can do this with outcomes that are one-day outcomes, or you can do this with projects that have months, but basically have checkpoints all across the journey. Now let's say that you have applied all of these principles that we've talked here today. However, still things don't go as planned. Well, this happens all the time, do not worry. However, something that happens as a result of things not going as planned is that tension starts to build up in the team. People start to get disgruntled, people start to fear or to worry or to yell at one another sometimes. Again, that's something we don't tolerate in our companies, but I've seen how other people engage and other teams engage, and it's not pretty. It leads to a lot of negative outcomes that we just simply want to avoid. So how can you do that? How can you avoid things escalating in that way? Well, that's principle number 5, and that is to always talk in specifics. In specific terms, not in generalities. I'll give you 2 examples. Number 1, if you give someone feedback, don't tell them, hey, the way you do your work isn't good. Because then they're left wondering, what about my work isn't good? Instead of doing that, tell them specifically, this one specific thing you do can be done better. For example, if someone writes an article and the editor checks that article and says, oh, well, I can't work with this is bad, whatever. Instead of doing that, they can say, well, look, in the introductory phase, these are the things you could do better. And then they know the other person already sees that instead of complaining or instead of negative feedback, they see it as, oh, this is something I can now use to become better as a professional. They immediately see that feedback and understand, okay, this is what I failed to consider, and this is what I can consider next time to improve. When you're that laser specific, it helps everyone in the team. More so, you can use that specificity even in terms of conduct. When someone does or says things that are unaligned with the direction in which we want to go in terms of productivity, effectiveness, or overall general direction, you can give them feedback on that specific item. So instead of telling people you're always late, which can be true, you can say, dear Frank, today morning you should have been here by 8. You arrived here at 8 and 10. I would really like if that wouldn't happen again. Or whatever it is, but be very specific. Don't talk in general terms, talk in specifics. Talk in uncontradictable specifics, and then you just lay out the specifics and you talk as a team on those. That will typically raise the vibration because now people can see the exact issue and can discuss that issue as in the form of a solution. And now, as a bonus, I'm going to share with you one principle that has helped me become one of the best leaders that I am capable of. And I don't say that in terms of my own opinion, I say that in terms of the feedback I've gotten from hundreds of people that I have had the privilege of working with over the years. Before I tell you, I'm going to say the story, or a very relevant story to this. One day, it was around midday, and someone on my team had to deliver a very important outcome. And I followed up with them. I said, hey, are we still in line to have this today by the end of the day? And they said, well, my girlfriend's son just randomly started vomiting, so I need to take care of that first. And I said, oh, okay, do that, no problem. And then a few hours after that, maybe 3-4 hours after that, let's say it was 3 p.m. or whatever, I think their work schedule was until 7 typically. And I asked them, hey, have you managed to make any progress on the task at hand, because it's closing in to the end of the day and I really want to make sure we have this today. He came back to me and he said, Robert, I already told you I'm done for the day. And luckily everything was on Slack, and I checked my messages and I said, no, you didn't. What are you talking about? He said, well, I told you, that my girlfriend's son was vomiting. I'm like, okay, he was vomiting. Are you saying he was vomiting for the past 4 hours and you had to be there? Are you saying that the mother of the child didn't come home to check on their children? Or what are you saying? This, I don't understand. There are too many assumptions to be made here. At no point in time did you say, okay, because this happened, I am not going to work for the rest of my workday, or I'm not going to catch up on this later because I know this is due. Regardless, the conversation went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What I can tell you is that yes, it's reasonable for someone to accept a argument of, hey, I know this is due today. However, my son, or there's someone close to me, right, is sick, and I'm going to be attending to them for the rest of the day. Let's please, I'll deliver this early in the morning tomorrow by 10 a.m. Perfectly reasonable. However, what is not reasonable is for you to go to someone and say, hey, this happened, and then not tell them how that will impact the deliverable or the result that you are responsible for. I do not assume anything about anyone. If we agree that by 5 p.m. or by 3 p.m., doesn't matter, this deliverable will be in my hands, and you do not tell me otherwise, the only thing I will expect is that that deliverable will be in my hands by 5 p.m. If you tell me otherwise, very specifically, very succinctly, that this won't happen, then I can change my expectations. Otherwise, I will not assume anything. And I highly recommend you don't either. People assume too much. They assume that there are words in between the lines, that there are things that we should deduce. Leave the deductions for the detectives. Leave that to Sherlock Holmes. You don't need to deduce anything. You set expectations and don't assume anything else. If something you don't know or you're curious about, you can ask. If I don't ask you if this is going to delay your deadline, then by default, I'm not curious because you haven't said anything about it. So by default, I assume that it's not going to impact. Okay? So this works on both sides. People should not expect anything from their team leaders. Team leaders should not expect anything from their team that has not been set in the expectations we discussed in point 1. Otherwise, anything else is an assumption, which I highly recommend you avoid. Speaking of leadership and team leaders and team dynamics in general, if you want to know what real, true leadership looks like, we talk about it extensively in this video here, and I look forward to seeing you there.